I'm Mark Magistrelli, and today, as you've probably seen from the flyers, we're going to look at Rod Serling's formative years in Cincinnati and how his time in this town and working at WLW and also for WKRC impacted his future work. Here's a quote that Serling put in a collection of his plays about the WLW experience. For example, we think of Rod Serling as, rightly so, the creator of the Twilight Zone and the wonderful dramatic programs from the golden age of television. When he was starting out as a promising young writer, he was doing continuity. And for those of you who don't remember or haven't heard of the term continuity, at WLW, the continuity looked like this. These were the yellow script pages. And we're going to be talking about some of these because they indeed have Mr. Serling's name on them. But he wrote many different things, not just dramatic programs. For example, I think that he was referring to the two elements required in every Midwestern hayride. In Rod's words, a hayseed MC who strummed a guitar and said, "Shucks, friends," and a girl yodeler whose falsetto would break a beer mug at 20 paces. Okay, perhaps that wasn't his particular forte.
Sorry.
At one point, I will give you this anecdote. We're going to hear great anecdotes from the people on the panel and several in the audience. Man who worked in a Dayton ad agency by the name of David Clark, he's no longer with us. He told me that he was at a meeting in the Quasi Square conference room, and his client was waiting for the final pitch to begin for a new program. John T. Murphy, the head honcho, was present. I'm not sure about Jim Schaus, but this was a very important occasion. It was all but signed. It was just a matter of meet the young man who's going to write this for us and sign on the dotted line. So all the preliminary arrangements have been made, and there's small talk. And they're waiting for Rod Serling. Waiting. Small talk just dies out completely. Suddenly, in bursts Rod Serling. And he's been running. If you remember Channel 5, if you've been there, those 5 stairs, the 5 floors, okay. So he breathlessly falls into one of the high-back chairs in the conference room, starts to describe as rapidly as he can. He's selling, he's doing his full presentation, what this show is going to be about. His arm swings out, and knocks over the water pitcher. And it spills all over the client. That was pretty much it for the program, for the presentation. Just the same, Rod was not dismissed as a result of this incident, and I think that some of the WLW survivors would be the first to admit that such things would have happened for much less and smaller transgressions. At any rate, I do want to introduce the people on this panel who worked with Rod, who were Rod's friends, and can talk to us pretty extensively about his time in town. Starting on the side closest to me, this is Saul Marmer. Saul is a longtime friend of the Serling family, and we'll be hearing about him. Saul is also, I believe you've taught for quite some time, the extension course at UC. I know you've been involved with that over the years.
Institute for Learning and Retirement.
Okay. By the way, we are going to have to pass the microphone along every so often, panelists, because we have more people than we have microphones. But that's good. It'll work out. Jack Gifford, another WLW survivor and veteran. Survivor? Okay. In the same category, Mr. John Morris. We have a young lady who's currently writing a biography of Rod Serling, Amy Boyle Johnson. And at the very end, who will tantalize us with some seldom seen video clips, is Mike Sanders, who has been assiduously researching Serling's life for, Mike, how long has it been now?
Oh gosh, 20 years, I think.
I think so. And also, I do want to point out, in the audience today, we have Rosemary Kelly. If you could just turn around and wave.
They probably heard me. Thank you.
Rosemary's going to come up here.
No, I'm not.
Oh, yes, you are. I will come to you with this microphone,
No,
and she's going to talk about her time on the Leave It to Kathy series, which we have here on script, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And also another WLW veteran, Bill Myers, who's over there. Now, I have to say a few words about Bill. There are many of us in this business who can do some specific things, whether it be news or writing, what have you, do them very well, and that's fantastic, and I admire those people. Then there are the rare ones who can be parachuted into any kind of program, any type of format, and they're just great, and you can go to sleep at night because they're going to be sensational. That's a guy like Bill Myers, consummate broadcasting professional, and we're really glad you're here. Let's start off with Rod's arrival in Cincinnati in 1950. And just how did Rod Serling arrive at WLW? What happened that gave him that impetus to come to what was then known as the Nation Station?
Well, Rod was a student at Antioch College. He went there on the GI Bill when he got out of the Army, and got involved in radio when he was at Antioch, and spent some time in Marion, Ohio, so he has a lot of Ohio connections, doing an internship at a radio station there, WRNN, where he did Norman Corwin-style radio programs, and then he came to Cincinnati getting a job at WLW, known as the Nation Station, and it was probably the biggest employer in radio in the region, and so it made sense for an aspiring young radio talent to come to Cincinnati. When he got to Cincinnati, what he found was vastly different than what he had imagined, in that he thought, well, I'll be able to write drama and I'll be able to do all these things. He was a young man who wanted to change the world, and he was writing Geritol commercials and announcer's patter and those sorts of things to connect the programs together. From 1950, when he arrived in Cincinnati, through 1952, he worked, the beginning of 1952, he worked as a staff writer at WLW. Following that, again from the same introduction that Mark already quoted, called About Writing for Television, in the preface of his collected screenplays, Patterns, he talked about the decision that he made at the table of a Howard Johnson's with his wife to quit his job at WLW and become a freelance writer, and that's what he proceeded to do. He wrote freelance scripts and submitted them to national programs, but he also had an unbelievably unprecedented opportunity to write scripts for a local drama program that had been started across town at WKRC-TV by a young producer named Bob Huber. And the fact that this program had gotten on the air and was a sustained, dramatic program, one of the earliest and the only one of its type to be sustained for as long, over 2 seasons, Serling got an opportunity to write real drama for that program and was able to see it produced, and it became a laboratory for him. It became a place where he learned how to write drama, he learned how to project into the visual medium from his foundation in radio, and he learned a lot at the feet of Bob Huber when he was in the process of doing that. And so that sort of sets the context for him really becoming a dramatic writer, I think. And I believe that the folks that worked with him at WLW can talk at great length at sort of what the context was that he was working in radio that made him want to run in that direction.
If I could give you a PS on that. I remember Rod saying one time, his brother was a writer for one of the wire services in Washington, D.C. And Rod's one ambition was to be at least half as successful as his brother.
And as I recall, Rod's brother wrote a very good-selling book in the late 60s, The President's Plane is Missing. So
Yeah.
the talent was genetic. We're going to hear more from these wonderful folks, but right now I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball at Rosemary Kelly and Bill Myers, if you folks would both be so good as to come up, please. I have to tell you, this is something that just occurred to me because I had these Rod Serling WLW scripts in my hand, and I know that folks like you are veterans of what is called the cold read.
Oh, mercy.
So what I'd like to do, since no recordings exist of these programs, we're going to hear them perform for the first time in half a century. But keep in mind that this is what a young writer was expected to turn out at WLW.
Oh, yeah.
If you're expecting a trip into the unusual or the land of science fiction, it's going to be a little surprising. So I'm going to hand this to you, and I'm going to let Mr.
I don't
Myers.
know any of these people. Do I know y'all? Oh, yes. Oh, good. No, they're not. Listen, I noticed that the script, the date is August the 22nd, 1951. My grandchildren only think I'm 51.
This is going to be a problem.
I have a problem with this.
We'll have to buy the tape.
Okay.
All right, the announcer begins after the music and the Bendix Home Appliances credits on the screen. The program is called Leave It to Kathy. Yes, friends, another episode of the trials and tribulations of Kathy and her sidekick Vera, as the two girls face life and irate customers between the complaint desk, behind the complaint, think of what is it, Goober's department store. We'll look in just a moment, but first, let's look in on this. See the amazing new Bendix dryer at Cooper Appliance, 827 Madison Avenue, Covington, Kentucky, and at 422 Dixie Highway, Erlanger, Kentucky. Now, let's leave it to Kathy.
Now, I played Kathy. She was patterned after Julie Holliday. If you remember her on Broadway, Julie Holliday. And she was
Or
kind
Billy.
of dim. Okay? She said,
Or Billy.
now you're going to take Vera's part. That
Yeah,
was-
okay. You'll have to suspend your disbelief.
Raise your voice.
Yeah, that's right. That'll come up an octave. Oh, may I help you?
Surprise, it's me, your ever-loving Kathy.
Listen, my ever-loving Kathy, why the get-up?
Oh, didn't you hear about the masquerade?
Oh, what masquerade?
Tonight, the annual Goober's Masquerade Ball.
Is that Hassel tonight?
Yes, I'll say. And you know what?
What?
I'm going to win first prize.
What are you?
What am I? A fortune teller. What else could I go as?
Hey, you might put whipped cream on your head and go as a nut sundae.
Isn't this terrible? Those are words. We have to continue.
This is formative years.
This is terrible.
We're not too good either.
Well, I mean, Rod, I'm sure we're.
Now you know why we rewrote it.
Yes, that's enough.
We'll be talking about it
That's never going to make it.
So that was just a sample of Leave It to Kathy. Once again, was this what Rod Serling wanted in his heart of hearts to write? No, but it's a paycheck, okay? Here's another program, this time from November 1950, Adventure Express.
I think John Morris ultimately will be able to comment on Rod's humorous efforts. This is a special broadcast service of the nation station, meaning a public service program, PSA or not sponsored. Okay, let's voices in cadence. Adventure Express, Adventure Express, all over the sound of a chugging locomotive. Board, all aboard, chillin'. And the train whistles and the sound of wheels and the chugging. Okay, that's right, boys and girls. Time to hop aboard the Adventure Express for more adventures with Billy, Betty, and Uncle Jim. Right now, the travelers are in a doctor's office while Billy awaits the major operation of having a sliver extracted from his knee. And Billy says, "Ooh, jeepers." The doctor says, "There, see, Billy? There's a nice long splinter that won't be bothering you anymore." And Billy says, "Wowee, that is a big one." Betty says, "Let me see, Billy. Zowie, you gonna give him a big bandage, doctor?" "No, I think I'll just give him a little patch." And then Billy is disappointed. He says, "Aw." Then Uncle Jim, I guess it is, he chuckles. "Why, Billy, you sound disappointed that Dr. Smith's not going to put on a big cement cast." There I go on.
No.
It's a great report.
Thank you very much, sir. Sorry to put both you and Rosemary on the spot like that.
No, it's all right.
But I think that if perhaps Rod's comments later on perhaps may have been colored by things like this. The man that I do want to introduce you to right now is John Morris, and John can tell us more about these programs.
I was going to add a postscript again. This program was actually a format to get into young Henry Ford or young Einstein or whatever. And I was a student at the conservatory, then called the College of Music, in the radio TV department. And that was kind of our entree into the business, because we would, and my wife and I, would take parts in Adventure Express quite frequently. And they had some excellent actors, gentlemen who used the name Robert Middleton, which you may or may not remember. Sam Messer, another local. Rod did not take too kindly to our comments about Leave It to Kathy, though. I was reminiscing.
But then,
He would come walking into the studio, and I really didn't have much of a close acquaintance with Rod for obvious reasons. He would fling those scripts on the table, and here they are, chew them up. But we used to go up to Ruth Swigert's house, who played Vera. She lived out in Hyde Park, and good actress. She had done Broadway, and eventually wound up with a legitimate theater up in the Cherry Country in Michigan. And we would sit there and enjoy a libation, and
She was kind of like a Rosalind Russell type.
yes, she was.
She could be, and then I was a dumb-witted one.
My one contribution personally to the show was a theme song. I wrote it, and Bert Farber reacted the first time around as if he'd stepped in something a dog had left. So pardon my poor singing. It was da 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 da. Very
nice.
memorable.
We know why John was a director and not a town.
That's right.
But Rod was a very private kind of guy. I don't think anybody really got close to Rod, at least to my knowledge, and always wound tight as a drum. If you were around Rod, particularly when he was working, you started to tense up along with him. He would grit his teeth as he talked, and you kind of felt sorry for the guy. But as I said, his one ambition was to be half as successful as his brother, who probably in later life thought, gee, I wish I was half as successful as my brother.
His brother's saying that now.
Yes. But that was pretty much my acquaintance with Rod. As I said, we never got close because of the rewrites.
I'd like to call upon another of the WLW writing staff right now, Jack Gifford. Now, Jack, could you tell us a little bit about what it was like as a writer at the station at that time, and what it was like having Rod Serling as one of the other writers on the staff?
I met the guy in the spring of 1950. He just graduated from Antioch, and I just got out of the University of Wisconsin. And I got there, entered a radio writing contest, and won it. With that came a cash prize and a job with the station. When I got to the station, I was ticked off because I had to share a prize with a little swarthy 5'2" or 3", whatever guy, and he didn't like me because he had to share it with me. We became very, very close friends. And as far as writing his own stuff, he did all the time. Radio and television stations are notorious for having parties. There's one somewhere every day of the week. And Rod would go to a few of them. He was always the first to leave. He would say, I've got something in the typewriter. I've got something in the typewriter. The guy had fantastic energy. As you say, he never stopped. But he did not have a sense of humor. We tried to, we would tell him a joke and so forth, and he would say, yeah. And yet,
he liked his own jokes.
exactly. And I'll tell you one, his favorite joke that he told 500 times, he would tell it to you one day, the next morning he'd say, "Did I tell you the one about bean soup?" About a little immigrant who came in the country, right off the boat, and he couldn't speak a word of English. And he was getting very hungry. A couple of days went by and he had nothing to eat. Finally he ran into an old countryman who could speak English. He said, I got to order something. He said, order bean soup. There'd be very good bean soup. Okay. So we had bean soup for the next 3 or 4 days, breakfast, lunch, dinner, every day, bean soup. He got a little tired of bean soup, but fortunately he ran into his little friend again. And he said, I have to have something else. He said, ask for apple pie. They make delicious apple pie here. So we went to the restaurant. The waitress said, what would you like? apple pie. Would you like anything on it? Bean soup. He told that.
That's a terrible joke.
I've got another joke, Serling joke.
Is it clean?
Yes, it's clean. Rod, I'm sure you know, is Jewish, and he told this particular story about this very devout Jewish gentleman who was in Hong Kong, and he had never missed going to the services on Saturday. And he goes down to the desk and he says, by any chance, is there any place that they hold Jewish services, maybe? He says, oh, yes. Go out, turn right, 2 blocks, turn right again, big building, many people go. He says, it is a synagogue? Oh, yes, many people go. So he goes out, down, into the, and he sits down, and everything is perfectly kosher. The cantor sings the right music, and everything's conducted as he had always heard it, and he was very deeply moved. So when the service ended, he goes up to the gentleman standing by the door, I'm not Jewish. And he says, I got to tell you, I did not expect to find such a synagogue as this in Hong Kong. And the service was just beautiful. I must thank you. And he says, oh, you Jewish? He says, yes. He says, don't look Jewish. I heard Roger laughing a number of times.
I told you you couldn't tell the joke.
I should have explained that every face in the place was Chinese.
You mentioned that he was Jewish, but he changed to Unitarian. His wife was Unitarian, Carol. And in small talking, get into that in a minute, Friday afternoons, when small talk time, we'd stop working, throw our typewriters away. Somebody always ended up at a bottle. I don't know where the bottle came from. There was always a bottle on a Friday afternoon. And we rarely talked about religion, but it came up, and it's right, you're Jewish? He said, well, I'm half Jewish and half Unitarian. And I asked him, which half was which? He says, well, I was circumcised. Rod wrote more than just station breaks and some funny stuff. And the Saturday morning kids show, we were involved in quite a few so-called dramatic shows where we had casts of 10, 12 people, a full orchestra for themes and musical bridges. We'll print that. It was a newspaper series. It was a college series. I remember we traveled off from college to college. A very funny story about Ball State College, but I can't tell it here. Builders of Destiny, about important people that grew up here, the Firestones, and I don't know, there are a bunch. And my favorite was Danny McGuire, Nighttime Operative. Now, who done it?
I think he did the bridges from Melody Showcase too, didn't he?
Yes. Well, everybody wrote on that. Mm-hmm. And the Straw Hat Matinee, another one. And as Rosemary pointed out, we fed the NBC network one summer.
I took, what's her name? Kate Smith's place.
Kate, yeah.
She went on hiatus, so they thought that'd be nice to put this on.
Ate like a pig.
Well, I didn't sing like her.
Rod was very upset that at the station, because he couldn't get name credit for anything we wrote. Excuse me. We were staff writers. And at least once a week, there were 3 of us, we'd march down to the program director's office, Indian file, and the guy's office, and ask for 2 things, name recognition on our shows and a raise. The answer was no and no. This went on every week. It's interesting to note that when Rod did make it, that he did a lot to bring out the writer in the credits, to capitalize the writer. The writer was always big before, here's a big star, here's a big this, here's the director, and the writer was way down here in the middle. And he did a lot to bring that up. That was very important to him. And I remember his pre-Twilight Zone shows, he sold a script to Bruce Cabot. big movie, well, that was a big movie star, kind of a drunk, but he was in the movies. And it was a check for $50. He sold the script for $50. We said, wow, it's Bruce Cabot's signature on this check. What are you going to do with it? He said, follow me. He marched right down the street and put it in the bank. The name meant nothing to him.
No.
He was a money writer. He was truly a television pioneer. And there were no television writers at that time. There were playwrights, and, radio writers, movie scenario writers, but not a true television writer. And Rod was one of the very first, with guys like Reginald Rose and Patty Chayefsky and some other geniuses. He was, I think we all did a great. If he never wrote a Twilight Zone, he'd be remembered for pioneering television, period. I have down here that he made TV writing truly an art form, and I believe that.
Yeah.
Somebody along the line called him a genius. I don't know if he was a genius or not. He worked very hard, and he was terribly prolific. Saul has more information on that. He pumped out more stuff than most of us realized they wrote, and he wrote a little bit of everything. He even hosted the world's worst quiz show where, remember that? I don't know the name of it. Nobody remembers the name of
Was
it.
a forgettable one.
What
Yes.
is the Missus?
The Liars Club.
I was on that.
Pardon?
What is the Missus?
Quiz the Missus, was that it?
Yeah, I was on that.
I thought it came out of Hollywood, no?
No, it's Liars Club.
It's what?
Liars Club. Rod Serling's Liars Club.
Liars.
Liars. That was it.
Must have come out of Bryce Hill.
The guy had a couple faults. He smoked 4 or 5 packs of cigarettes a day. You never saw him on television without a cigarette. And he boozed a little bit. Not here. When he got out west, was spoiled. Saul knows more about that. When he'd come back, he'd call me, and I'd meet him at a hotel bar. And he would drink a glass of vodka this big, faster than I can drink a glass of water. This would be 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. And at his own party, WLW had a 25th anniversary, and Rod was the chief guy there. In one of the downtown hotel ballrooms. And about 10 o'clock, Rod was completely smashed. He was just out of his gourd. This was 1972. And a couple of us had to take him back to his hotel room. Those are some of the unfortunate things about the guy. And from 1972 on, he kind of went downhill. I think you will attest to that. And he died in 1975, at a very early age. Tried to have a heart transplant, and his veins just broke like glass. He shattered it. 4 or 5 packs of cigarettes a day, I guess, did that. But Rod was a friend, a good friend. He was at my house on 2 New Year's Eves, and we'd go to football games, Wisconsin, Ohio State football games a couple times. Driving with Carol was an experience. I think they had an old Nash or something.
Yeah, Nash.
And Rod would sit in the front seat, she drove. One arm out the window and 2 fingers on the steering wheel going 90 miles an hour. And Audrey, my wife, and I would sit there, we were white knuckles. And she was, and Rod would try to say something, no, I'm driving. She, I don't know, around, when you knew him, but Carol was boss of Rod. She was bigger than Rod. Then again, most people were. And she would say, Rod, sit. Rod, do it. Rod, do it. And so we'd joke and say, Rod, roll over. Sit up, beg, Rod, beg. He was embarrassed by it, the way she treated him. And speaking of begging, he had a dog, Robbie. The world's meanest dog. Little Cocker Spaniel. Pretty little thing. And just a vicious thing. His teeth were always exposed. And we were at his apartment one time, and for no reason at all, the dog went thunk. It was on my chest, his paws right here, and his teeth were 3/4 of an inch from my nose. And Rod would say, don't move. I said, don't move, I'm frozen, I can't. I wouldn't think of moving. He'd come and grab it. It was just a horrible thing. But that had nothing to do with Rod's writing. He was very, very creative. He originated, he was kind of the, I would say, chief idea guy at WLW. Originating shows, working on new projects. And with the 5 writers that were there, Rod probably did most of the television. Because I guess he's better at it, most adept.
Maybe you can answer a question of mine. Wasn't there a program series that Rod wrote for WLW and they tried to cancel it, and Rod had a contract and he filled it by writing 26 episodes of The 25th Man? It had to do with, I've heard this rumor, it had to do with aging. And the subject had to do with the 25th man who was over 65.
I don't remember that at all.
I have no idea where I heard it, but I heard that he had done that.
That must have been on a Friday afternoon when somebody brought out the No, seriously, I don't remember that at all.
But he got paid for it.
What I'd like to do right now is, before we get to Michael Sanders' clips, and you may want to get that set, I do want to turn things over for a few moments. You can just pass the mic down, Jack, to your right, to a man who was Rod Serling's friend for many, many years, and can tell us a little bit more about the personal side of the writer, Saul Marmer.
I was jealous of Rod Serling because he and I paralleled in a lot of things, most of which he did and I would have liked to have done. We were both in high school on the newspaper. He happened to be editor. I just wrote articles. We were both in drama, thespians. I happened to have won a scholarship to the College of Music. I'm sure Mr. Morris doesn't remember, but I was there as well in Manel Stallard's program. And Bert Ely gave me a scholarship, and I think it was $50, if I remember correctly. But he did everything I wanted to do. And we were exactly the same age. My wife and his wife were exactly the same age. We were married, my wife and I were married on August 1st. He and Carol were married on July 31st, 1948. I was in the infantry. He was in the infantry. However, he went on to paratrooping, and that wasn't for me. I took one jump in OCS, and it was off of one of these towers, and that was high enough for me. We paralleled everything. We were both the same religious background. We were both Jewish.
Half Jewish.
He was full Jewish. I was. When he moved to Cincinnati, we were living in an apartment building on Sydney Road, first apartment building around the corner, 4 apartments. We were on one side. Rod and Carol moved into the apartment on the other side, and became good enough friends that we never, ever locked our doors. I always knew what he had for dinner because it was a strange way of doing it, but when we both had disposals, and when his dinner went down through the disposal, it came up in our sink. I assume it was reciprocal on that part. Rod was very generous with me in the fact that he knew what I would like to have done. So he would take me down to the studio on many occasions. He would never talk about a script while it was in process, only after it was done. But that kept me pretty well up on what he was doing. I'll never forget the morning that he came bursting into our apartment because, again, the doors were not shut. And my wife and I were still in bed. We weren't dressed for company. And he's got an envelope in his hand. And he said, I finally did it. I finally did it. Here it is. First check. Craft Theater, $1,000. And that was like $1 million back in 1951 or whatever it was. We were in the shoe business, and one of the things that we had was something called the birthday club. And each child who made a purchase would fill out a birthday card. We would send it to them, and they would come in and get a little toy. I, at that time, was buying closeout toys from a fellow who accumulated them in New York. And all I had to tell him was I want so many of them by age groups and gender. As soon as we would get that in, I would have to tell Rod because he wanted to come down and unpack all of these toys. I gave him free rein to do so. It took a lot of time and a lot of effort, but as a reward, he was able to take anything that he wanted. And the airplanes, the cars, the things that you put together, all of these kind of things are what he got his pay for. And we, in that apartment building behind, we had a garage which was underneath the apartments, which meant you had to go down a slope into the garage, and that was his racetrack for the cars and the trucks and so on. My wife and he spent more time together, I think, than my wife and I, because he would spend a lot of time at home, and they would go to Rapid Run Park in Price Hill, and they would take along with them Mean Robbie, and we had a little black and white dog. I can't think of that. And his name, because we're in the shoe business, happened to end up being Shoo Shoo. And Robbie and Shoo Shoo did not get along well. And whenever Robbie would run free, he would attack Shoo Shoo, and he bit a big hunk out of his ear one day. And from then on, I wouldn't let the dogs get together under any circumstances. Rod had a terrible temper if he was provoked, and Carol loved to provoke him. And I'm not going to need your help. They shadow talked. Say something.
Oh, I know what you're
Well, I know what you're saying.
saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
she talked right
She
back.
talked
Yeah.
right back to him. Everywhere she would say, or he would say, she would talk right back to him.
I drove
And
it
it
a while.
would make him furious.
Drove it a while.
One day, whatever the topic, I'm not sure, but all of a sudden we heard a terrible crash. He had gotten so angry that she ran away from him and went into the bathroom, closed the door, and it was one of these hollow doors, and he actually smashed the door with his fist, trying to get his anger out. So,
He's very strong.
when he had his first child, my wife and Carol were again very close. And in fact, I won't swear to it, but my wife said she helped name Jody. And they got along very well. And Rod wrote a little jingle. And it went something like this. Jody, Jody, Jody Sue, your mother is Unitarian and your father is a Jew. I thought that was kind of creative. I could take up the whole afternoon, and I'm not going to do that. Only to say that he was very generous. He would write his script for the storm. He would have it produced and see it, which was a tremendous advantage to him. It then gave him the opportunity to rewrite it for the big market. Down there, he had one little set, and he could now expand it as he saw fit. He could add characters, he could do all kinds of things. Then he would send it on to New York to an absolutely wonderful agent that he had, an elderly woman, at least she always appeared to be elderly, Blanche. What was her last name?
Gaines.
Blanche Gaines?
Gaines. And there was a time when he started to have to go up to New York on a fairly regular basis as his set scripts were submitted, and he would have the opportunity then to help make a presentation with her to Kraft Theater, Lux Theater, all of those. And it got to be such a hassle that he had to just move up there. It just became that important to him. Oh, I forgot to mention that he, I don't know whether these gentlemen knew at the time that he was the highest paid man under Crossley. He was getting $75 a week down there. Oh, you're all getting.
Oh, yeah.
Well, my father wasn't so generous. My father paid me $75 a week.
And we went up to $100 a week.
Whoa. He finally moved up to Bridgeport, Connecticut, and in the shoe business, the shoe show, I was up there several times a year, so I was up there, and I always took my wife. We went up one time, and we wanted to see a particular show on Broadway. I think it was Mystery, and I can't think of it offhand, but it was the hottest thing on Broadway, and we tried and could not get tickets. Called Rod, and we got 4 tickets, second row center, which were pretty decent seats. When he was living in Bridgeport, invited us out there a couple of times, but on the first occasion, we had finished dinner, and we're sitting around the pool out in back in the backyard, and he's saying, I never, ever thought I could ever get to this point. I was hoping, but never so early in my career. He said, things are so good. I've got trusts set up for the 2 girls. Got a trust for Carol. The worst thing that could happen to me right now is for the thermostat in that pool to go bad. That I thought was terrific. Had occasion again, because of my business, I would get out on the West Coast every once in a while. And on one particular occasion, I think we were at the Beverly Hilton or whatever they called it. And Carol called and said, we want to take you out to dinner. So we were hoping for a little intimate dinner over here someplace, and we would sit in the corner and trade lies and whatever. And that wasn't for Rod. We ended up at Chasen's, which was very heavily visited by all the people who wanted to be seen and see other people who wanted to be seen. And again, I thought, well, maybe we'll get a corner table someplace. Rod asked for a table as close to the middle as he could possibly get, and this is not the Rod that I knew for all those years. And on the way to the table, he would stop and hello, he would pat each other on the back and gush all over each other. And then we finally sat down and we started to order. Wait, just a minute, he had to get up and he talked to this one over here, sit down. Again, he's about ready to pick a bite of food. Oh, I just saw him. I never saw him. I haven't seen him for a long time. I'll be back in a minute. The whole dinner, he was away from the table most of the time. At one point, Claire Trevor happens to walk up, and she had appeared in a number of his Twilight Zone. And she said, oh, Rod, I'm so happy you're here. I've got to tell you, my son has just finished drama school. He is just a wonderful, wonderful actor. You've just got to find a place for him or something. He's, oh, absolutely, don't you dare. Give me his telephone number. No, have him call me at the office and come in anytime. Again, this was not the Rod that I knew all those years. Went back to the hotel, and it was fairly early in the evening, 8:30 possibly. And I said, Rod, why don't you come on in and sit at the bar or come up to our room? Let's talk a little intimately, because we really hadn't talked all evening. And he said, no, I've got to get to the studio first thing in the morning. There's no way, I'm sorry. And I made some choice remarks I will not repeat for you. And next morning, 8 o'clock, the telephone rings. It's Carol. She apologized all over the place. He had gone to Hollywood, and she was hoping that would never happen. Another time we were there, we went out to his home in Pacific Palisades, which I think is still where Carol lives. And they had a pool, and on the other side of the pool, they had a little office built for him. She would not allow him to smoke in the house. She could, I don't know how she ever controlled that, but he took me to the office one time, opened the door, and you couldn't even see in there. It was just solid smoke. His hands were yellow from having smoked as many cigarettes as he had. And I couldn't even get in the office. I was stifled. I could go on, but I'm going to let somebody else talk.
Oh, Saul, that's a good.
What happened to the Twilight Zone that upset Carol?
I thought that was common knowledge.
No.
Carol was extremely unhappy with Rod at one point. He and the Columbia Broadcasting Company had been pretty much buddy-buddy for a long time. But there came a time when they just wanted to change things a little bit, and he would not allow them to do that. He wanted his name up here. He wanted to write the bulk of the scripts. He wanted to front the thing. Well, they wanted him to front it, because that was one of the selling features, to see Rod Serling as he introduced things. But he got so disgusted, he said, buy the damn thing from me then. And so they bought him out for $600,000. And it was worth probably 3 or 4 times that at that point. And with all the syndication and repeat broadcasts and so on and on, it was just something that Carol would have lived off of very comfortably. She at one time, he then went, well, I'll let the others talk about that.
$600,000 for the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
Remarkable. One of the things that you mentioned was how Rod was using the WKRC series The Storm as something of a laboratory where he could work on scripts and then sell revised versions of those to the networks. And I think you're going to just have a real treat right now, because Mike Sanders has come along with some rarities from his collection. As he said earlier, he has spent about 2 decades delving into Rod's early life and work in Cincinnati. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike, because you've got the information and you have
I have the remote.
And the remote.
Well, let me start off by setting some context. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm used to standing up in front of a lecture hall, so I can project a little bit. I want to set the context. We've heard a lot about it, but I want to show you a couple of excerpts of some of these shows that Serling worked on as a staff writer at WLW, so you can understand some of his interest in trying to find some outlets for the dramatic kinds of things that he was going to later be known for. The first clip that I've got for you is a piece from Melody Showcase, which was a big program on WLW. It even went out network for quite some time, and I'm sure these gentlemen worked on that program and
Benny Clooney was on.
We've got a little clip from the fall of 1951, which was around the time that the storm began to get really some traction and some notice. So here's the first clip.
Hello, Mike.
I'll never do it. I'll never do it. I'll never do it again. Say, set me up some sarsaparilla there, bartender.
Double?
No, you better make it a single. I'm riding tonight.
No wonder they're shooting the guns off. There's plenty of excitement here tonight. Everybody's celebrating the big, the tremendous Cross-Lake Television Jubilee. Wherever you go,
This is the kind of stuff that you guys were writing to connect the program. And so it's this stuff, the Crosley stuff, and the pattern that led into that was the content that
during the big
was the
Cross-Lake
script
TV
writing
Jubilee,
that
your local
these gentlemen
will
were
be
engaged
delighted to give you a complete demonstration of Crosley Television. He's anxious to have
Serling
you
trademark
compare
is on this.
Crosley TV with any other set you can buy. He wants you to compare the sharp, clear, bright pictures this set gives you. Go.
Now let's take a look at, unfortunately this is on videotape, so let me pop the other tape in here and show you a clip from the other program that I have from WLW that helps set the context. This is Straw Hat Matinee. This is an afternoon program that also went out over network, and like many of the programs at the time, this is a show that would go out network and then be on the air longer periods of time locally. And one of our audience members today, Rosemary Kelly, was in this program, and I believe that this clip features her. This is the end of the musical number.
One thing that Nell just never scolds me about, though, and that's the different clothes that I wear each day. The fashions, you know. And today I thought this particular outfit that I had on is very pretty. You can wear something like this for just almost any occasion, and it's a perfect into fall and into winter dress. It's warm, and it'll also be very stylish just any place that you want to go. It's made out of a wool jersey, and the color is beige, and we've teamed the color beige with rust, or you may prefer to call it bittersweet. Now the dress is very full, also fitting for the fuller skirts for this coming fall and it's cut along very slim and by a line. There's an unpressed pleat in the front, which makes it very, very nice for walking. Now, the belt is of your rust or your bittersweet suede.
I think you get the idea there. A lot of connecting material, setups by the announcers for the commercials, the commercial text, that kind of stuff. You'll forgive there's some typos in this. I teach at the University of Cincinnati. I had one of my students work on this. Spelling and basketball have not had good years. The first clip that I want to show you from the storm is a clip called from a program called The Last Waltz. And let me tell you a little bit about the storm so that you understand how this came about. In the early spring of 1951, there was a television viewer who was an amateur playwright. Her name was named Edith S. McGinnis. And she sent in a package of scripts to the TV station saying, I think you guys ought to do a drama show. Happened that Bob Huber was the program director there at the time, and he was a theater buff. He worked very much with the local theater companies in town, doing community theater, doing stuff out of the various theaters in town with both amateur and professional actors. He took this opportunity to pitch this idea to the folks that ran WKRC Channel 12 in Cincinnati, and they bought the idea. And so the first 4 episodes of the series were Edith S. McGinnis scripts, and they were Ambassador of Death in May of 1951, May 11th, Dead Indeed, The Last Waltz, which we'll see a clip of here, and The Chosen Five. And what we're going to see is a piece of 16 millimeter film that was shot as B-roll. All of these programs were done live to air, and there was no recording. Videotape did not exist. But there were occasions when they had an exterior or some kind of complicated setup when they would shoot part of the scene on film. And then during the right time, someone would cue the technician, and the technician would roll the film. And the film would have either matched sound with it, or it would have some sort of sound transcription that came from a big disc that would play as sound effects. And so this is a silent piece of film from The Last Waltz. This is not one of the episodes that Serling wrote. This is an early episode written by Edith S. McGinnis. George Palmer. And he's a great example of people at the stations did everything. Rosemary was talking to me about this earlier today. He was the head newsman at the station. He directed programs. He wrote scripts. He appeared in programs. He did a talk show. I mean, people went from one. There weren't these genre slots that people got fit into.
He played Danny and David.
No White Streets,
This shows also, because Taft Broadcasting was owned by a newspaper company, one of the things that Bob Huber loved to do was use fake newspapers, because he could have the boys downstairs print them all the time at the Times-Star. And so I would say good half of the episodes used fake newspapers as important plot elements or visual cues to give the viewer information. So all these exteriors that were shot were all shot on 16 millimeter film, and this is actually the raw footage. Not all of this was used in the final program, and there are several takes of this, but these are just some excerpts to show you what that material looked like. And there were several scenes of this, and this is the scene where that guy gets whacked at the end. So this is him getting whacked. It's sort of a subjective thing. Let's see here. Let's see if we can go to another clip.
Oh, there's Rod.
Let's see here. We want to go. Oops. We're going to go now to No Gods to Serve. This is the episode that most people are familiar with from the storm, because this is an episode that was done live, but then it was also not only later repeated, but it was also filmed in January of 1952 in an attempt to try to take the storm as a network program to the network executives. And so here's a clip from No Gods to Serve.
The soap of beautiful women presents the 1951 TV Dial award-winning drama, The Storm.
This is the storm. Nature raging with wind and rain and destruction. This is the storm that sends rain to the sing man's cheek as a reminder that nature is impatient for the storms he creates in his mind, his petty battles on the earth. Today, we find men at war, fighting for life, that they see others lose so easily. In the service of their country, they often find no gods to serve.
Razor Red, this is Razor Blue. Razor Red, this is Razor Blue. Do you hear me? Razor Red, this is
The episode is a
Razor
good
Blue.
example of some of the constraints that they were working under, because the scene takes place in a basement of a house that these soldiers are holed up in. And they had very little room at WKRC. They were in the what's now the county courthouse on the 7th and 8th floor there, and so they had very small ceiling rooms to work in, and very, very tightly constrained, so they didn't have a lot of room for lighting and those kinds of things. So most of the storms are very claustrophobic feeling, very tiny space that they work within. 11-foot ceilings, and when the lights were installed, some of the tall people, like George Bringle, would hit their heads on the lighting fixture.
You guys traded your heads. So he gets,
This is Jay Overholt. He was in a large number of the storms. He later went out to Hollywood and appeared in a couple of the Twilight Zone episodes before he was tragically killed in an automobile accident.
And if they ain't freaks to death, they get mowed down before they get a chance to ask why. Would you rather be out there?
And again, one of the things that really made this possible was that there was an incredibly large and fertile community theater movement here in Cincinnati, and lots of talent coming through the College Conservatory of Music, as well as the fact that WLW was here attracted lots of talent that could perform in a variety of capacities.
I should find him. I thought I saw something moving down on the road on Overflow. What's it in? The Jeep turned over. I was dead. This guy's ran 2 feet away.
Now, this wasn't the first storm that Serling had written. The first season was a summer replacement, and it began in May of 1951. And as I said, the first 4 episodes were written by an amateur playwright, Edith McGinnis. Following the last of those 4, in June 22nd of 1951, a regional magazine called TV Dial, one of the precursors of TV Guide, awarded WKRC and The Storm with their TV Dial Award for pioneering drama on local television. And that award came out in July of 1951. And the award was based upon the scripts written by Edith McGinnis and the production work done by Bob Huber. Obviously, the storm was, and you can even see over there some Enquirer clippings in a frame. The storm was getting some newspaper coverage. People were watching this. It was on at 4:30 in the afternoon on Sundays, and Serling was obviously paying attention to this across town at WLW, gnashing his teeth while he was writing Straw Hat Matinee and Midwestern Hayride. Well, he calls Bob Huber up and says, I've got some scripts. And boy, did he have some scripts. The script following the 4 that won the award was Serling's first script for The Storm, called Keeper of the Chair. And this was aired on July 10th, 1951. And Serling was credited on screen as R. Edward Sterling, not under his real name, because he was under contract to LW. And he wasn't about to jeopardize his $75 a week because he was poaching across town at the rival station. So all of his Storm episodes, up until a certain point, are credited as R. Edward Sterling for the screenwriting. And that was his first one. Then he wrote another one that aired on 7/31/51 called The Air is Free. And I have an excerpt from The Air is Free. And again, this is not from the actual live broadcast that was done at that time, but is from the film version that was done after the Storm closed production in an attempt to try to sell this concept to the network still. Again, because this was produced after the Storm had ended its run, the cat had already been let out of the bag, and Serling had actually resigned from the station, so his name appeared on the 16mm film. Again, so this is a film production that was done on a soundstage in Dayton, Ohio. Film Associates shot the film.
She'll be out in just a couple of minutes now.
He knows I'm here.
Oh, yes, I told him.
You said 4 o'clock.
Yes, ma'am. You can come back then.
Mrs. Cameron, my name is Steele. I'm with the Evening Telegraph.
This is an interesting episode because it
Can I go
certainly has
now?
all the earmarks of the Twilight Zone.
Take it easy.
It has the twist ending. These guys are, this is sort of the
Also give me a chance to let out some of the hate I felt.
framing device. These guys are coal miners.
Get out.
The coal mine collapses. These guys are at odds with one another. One is blackmailing another.
Sooner or later I wouldn't be
And
satisfied.
so
to stick
the guys
my
are
imaginary
trying to do each other in and use the mine collapse as a
blow a gasket up in my
way to
head.
get their nemesis out of the way.
Forget Peg and
But there's
forget
a
the
twist
kid.
ending at the end that's very reminiscent
All I
of
remember
Twilight
was a
Zone.
little blood-sucker, Joe Dombrowski. I was afraid I'd do something with that pickaxe besides big coal. That's when it happened. Everybody stopped working. Like we were puppets, and somebody dropped the strings. Now it's gas. Somebody lit a fuse underneath the world that blew up around us. And I don't know how long before my eyes opened.
So that was in July of 1951 that the original version of this aired live. And following that, there were 2 more episodes that were written by other people. Serling wrote the 2 episodes that he did. A married couple, Kamari Cameron and Bruce Cameron, wrote the next episode. And a fellow named Bob Singer wrote the episode after that. And then the last episode of the first season, the summer replacement, aired on September 25th of 1951. And that was titled Vertical Deep. And that was Serling's 3rd script for the first season.
Bob Singer was an engineer at KRC.
Correct. And Kamari Cameron was the makeup woman there. So Serling wrote 3 scripts for that first season of 9, and then they went into a second season at the end of September. On September 30th, 1951, a phone call from Louis was Serling's next script for The Storm, and he went on to write a series of 29 scripts. He wrote every script for the second season. And during that first season, the 3 scripts that he wrote, he was getting $25 a piece for them. Well, he was at a rival station across town. He didn't have a lot of bargaining power. And so he was getting 25 bucks a pop for them. Well, when you're making 75 bucks a week and you get a windfall of 25 bucks, that's plenty of money. Well, because these were such much higher quality scripts than the other material that Huber had been working with, he and Serling reached an agreement that Serling would get paid $125 a piece for the scripts that he sold thenceforth. So all the second season scripts, all 29 of them, he got paid $125 a piece. What I want to point out is that Serling was making $100 by his own admission by some of the scripts that he was selling nationally. His first national sale, that was earlier in 1951, was The Stars Over Hollywood. He sold that script for $100, and that was Grady Everett for the People. And that was one of the scripts that was recycled later on in the second season of The Storm. So he was making pretty good money, and by my calculations, ended up making on the order of about, let's see here. Almost $4,000, $3,705 for the scripts that he wrote for The Storm, which is pretty good money back in those days, and belies his groaning and moaning about how poor he was during that period of time. Let's see here, what's the next little clip that I've got? The last clip that I have from The Storm is a piece, and this is one of the misspellings, sorry about that. This is, again, B-roll footage from a script called Twilight Rounds, which is an early incarnation along the track of writings that he did, starting with A Good Right Hand while he was a student at Antioch, that led to Requiem for a Heavyweight. And these were all scenes that were shot in a local boxing arena. It could be, where was you suggesting, John, the other day when we talked?
Could be music hall.
Could be music hall, possibly the Gardens, but music hall is probably a better bet because it's more in proximity to the Times Star building at the time. But there is a whole bunch of this B footage that is accompanied by sound effects of the boxer talking to himself, reflecting. And I have the sound effect elements on an aluminum transcription disc as well. And one of the projects I'm undertaking with my students during the spring quarter this year is that we're going to follow the script for this episode and reconstruct the scenes with the visual and the sound elements to recreate the scene as it was broadcast live as a B footage roll-in. Because the long shots, the close-ups, the various over the shoulders are all here. The entire range of footage that got shot. So my students and I are going to try to reconstruct this quarter to give us an intact clip with the sound.
Who's the actor, do you know?
The actor is Jay Overholtz.
Oh, that's Jay.
He's the fellow who appeared in a couple of Twilight Zones early in the run of the Twilight Zone. He was one of the mainstay lead male actors in The Storm.
Jay was a little guy.
Michael, I'm going to ask you a question before the program started. You were talking about the one surviving kinescope, the one actual live broadcast that exists from the storm in somewhat battered form. And I think you have a clip of that here?
Yes,
I'm just show a little bit of it.
I'll put that up now. The one episode that exists of the storm is called Aftermath, and that was a program that was aired live on 11/27/1951. And this one there was no video recording at the time. The only way that a program was recorded was through a very expensive and technically sophisticated process known as kinescope recordings. And there weren't any kinescope recorders at local stations. They were too expensive and too complicated. The networks had kinescope recordings. All of the local stations here in Cincinnati at one time or another fed programming to the network. So the network coaxial connections went both ways. And the episode of The Storm that we have in its entirety is this one here, the Aftermath. And it was kinescope recorded at the request of Bob Huber. And WKRC ended up paying $577.64 to have this kinescope recording done. And let me put this in perspective for you. The entire budget for the episode that we saw was $400, and that included Serling's $125 script fee.
Wow.
So they paid $577 just to have this recorded. Unfortunately, what happened was, in transmission, because this is going over cable lines, there was some interference that occurred. I don't know, water seeped in, some things happen sometimes, and so the recording is marred, and they could never use it in the way that Huber had envisioned as a method to sell the program to the network. That was the idea, is that they wanted to sell the program to the network and make it out of Cincinnati. His idea was, it's cheaper to do it here. We have talent, we have the ability, we have the stories. We'll do them here. You get them cheap, and we've got a series on the network.
There was one program, Mr. Finchley and the Bomb. And we filled up the studio with the cast and everyone involved because the storm did it on the Saturday night, and the following Tuesday night, I think it was on Lux Video Theater.
Right.
Ringo played the part here locally, and everybody's oohing and ahhing what somebody could do if they had money to spend.
Yep. and certainly the networks had different budgets than the $300 to $400 that KRC was putting on. Let me also put in perspective the fact that up until the 6th show of the 2nd season of The Storm, which was a show called Pandora's Box in November of 1951, which was the episode right before Mr. Finchley, The Storm was not commercially sponsored by anybody. It was a sustaining program, which means that KRC put it on the air with no advertisers. They carried the show, its first season of 9 and the first 5 episodes of the 2nd season, and they finally had some advertisers for Pandora's Box, Hanson Brothers and Wurlitzer were the sponsors for that episode. This episode was also sponsored, and this is the kinescope recording clip as it exists.
Two great names, Sylvania, first in television. And
By the way, this is the first episode of The Storm that Serling had his real name in the credits of because it was going to New York. And he was willing to, this was before he had resigned his staff position.
More terrible than the storm he has created, the aftermath.
Carolyn Watts on the organ, by the way.
Thank you. I was trying to Carolyn Watts. Oh, yeah.
Newspaper? You big newspaper?
Yeah, little bruises. Understand that Williams guy wound up in the hospital. Probably really moldy.
Surprise. Williams had it coming. No good punk. No better than a gangster. Some wall tried to fix the fight. He caught one of the guys.
No kidding. Jumping fix, huh?
Yeah, that's the only way Williams could have won. The other guy laid down according to plan. Either that or tie his hands, and that would have been too noticeable. Yeah, they caught one of the guys.
It's unfortunate that this one is technically marred because if you compare this to other series of the time, anthology drama series that were coming out of the network, this one holds its own. They spent a little extra money on this. They were up to $400. And I think it's really a testament to the creativity, not only of Serling's script, but also of Bob Huber as a producer, to be able to pull off this kind of staging in the Times Star building with so little money. This is Mary Louise Howard.
What are you trying to say?
What do you want, pictures?
The female lead.
Can't make it any clearer, Jane.
Serling didn't get any better writing for women, I have to tell you.
I'm going to wait for you. Rex, I'm going to wait for you. You're all I've got. I love you. I couldn't live without you.
Somebody ought to be getting this down. This would make good theater. Go home, will you?
Just like that, Rex. Just like that.
No. It's like that. Because here's a kiss for you, that's all. Keep it to remember me.
Let me also add here, one of the things that I think is very significant about the way that The Storm was structured is you heard on the Aftermath episode here, and also No Gods to Serve, this vocal introduction that tells the little sort of story about the turmoil in people's hearts and the encounters that men have with one another. and it ends up with the title of whatever the episode is. It leads right into it. Serling didn't write those. Bob Huber wrote those. And he wrote all of them. And this was a framing device that he borrowed from radio to put on the Storm, and almost all of them are written by Huber. Bob McKendricks wrote a couple of them. Bob McKendricks was his associate producer, but the scripts that Serling submitted didn't have any of that stuff. And I think it's significant because what device does Serling later use in the Twilight Zone to set up the Twilight Zones, but this sort of device where there's a lead-in that's vocally delivered, and of course, Serling was always pressuring Huber to let him go on screen and introduce these episodes that he wrote.
But also, you and I both been to Mass in Wisconsin,
Mm-hmm.
and Serling, when he was at WLW, wrote 2 ideas for what I consider the genius of the Twilight Zone. And one of them included a narrator on hand on the set to save money. That was the only reason, was to save money, which he later employed. He wrote that in 1950, before the Storm came out, to have the narrator introduce the pieces.
Influenced by, I believe, Alfred Hitchcock.
I would say Lights Out.
Possibly. I think Alfred Hitchcock is probably a better model for it, for what Serling did, though.
Lights Out, Alfred Hitchcock Presents wasn't out yet, 1950. I don't think.
Sure
Was it
was.
52?
Sure, the first series on DVD, 1950, has been released.
Okay, then I don't know.
You know, I remember Rod admitting one time that he had great difficulty thinking like a woman, and he would go to any lengths to avoid putting women in his shows.
And there aren't many women in any of these Storm episodes. That's quite accurate, I think, in
He
terms of
couldn't
looking
draw
at the
women,
scripts.
but neither could George Bernard Shaw, and he did okay.
But that concludes the clips that I have from the Storm series. I have a couple other clips when you're
Yeah, I
ready to
would
do
like
them
to get to,
of
one or
some of the
two.
national stuff that was based on Storm scripts.
And before we even leave the whole concept of Rod Serling's time in Cincinnati, and while you have the remote in your hand, I was wondering perhaps if people like Amy, Mike like yourself, or any of the folks here could comment a little bit on patterns and what Serling took from his WLW experience and folded into that script, which, as Mike put it earlier today, was the watershed right before Requiem for a heavyweight in his career. It was patterns that really broke through a lot of barriers for Serling.
I want to comment on, disagree a little bit. I'm not using his real name for the Storm series. He was very protective of anything he wrote. And if they bombed, he didn't want to be connected with it. And that was carried through with the movie production of Requiem. Ed Wynn was the manager or something, and Ed Wynn kept giggling, and it was destroying the thing. And Rod wrote me a thing and said, if Ed Wynn stays in the show, you're going to take his name off the script. He didn't want to be associated with anything that was a problem with one of his shows. Incidentally, that $50 script that Bruce Cabot bought was a goofy little show, little man, Christmas time, walking around with a bag of magic dust. He'd pop it into people's eyes, they'd be happy. We'll walk through a jail, all the little prisoners were now good little guys. And it was a Twilight Zone type of show. Interesting.
Well, here's an excerpt from the opening of Patterns.
Good morning, Mrs. Rich.
Good morning, Bill.
This early, you'll have to take the local.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Rob. That's good.
store executive, Ramsey and Company. Miss Stevens speaking. Oh, well, I'm sorry, but our switchboard doesn't open till 9 o'clock. You should be able to get Mr. Donaldson shortly after that. Well, I'll leave your name with his assistant, Mr. Phillips, all right? Thank you. Oh, Al. Yes? Put this on Bill's desk, will you, for Mr. Donaldson? Sure thing. Oh, Fortescue? Dell Steel and Copper, I think. Oh, well, Billy can take care of this. No sign of the new genius, I suppose. Is today the day? Yeah, it sure is. Yes, Anne? Can I help you, Miss Lanier? Why, thank you. Would you fill that with water for Mr. Ramsey? Certainly, Miss Lanier. The new executive arrives today, doesn't he? Mr. Staples? Yes. This morning, probably. You know, I hardly recognize Mr. Phillips' old office the way it's been fixed over for Mr. Staples. Real antiques, my goodness. Yes, well, it appears that Mr. Staples prefers early American to contemporary pieces. Now, all the girls are so excited, Miss Lanier. It's the first time since any of us have been in this office that a new vice president has been brought in from outside the company. Miss Evans, are you starting a rumor or merely repeating one? I'm sorry. Oh, it was just that he was being given an office so close to Mr. Ramsey's and all the other executives in the building. Mr. Staples' position in the company will be made clear when Mr. Ramsey chooses to define it. A new vice president is not made until another one leaves.
Certainly not a representative clip from the series, from the episode to talk about what was really strong about it. But let me add that this was aired on January 13th, 1955, and it was unprecedented. For the first time, a major network drama program was repeated as a live broadcast because it was so overwhelmingly received with positive accolades. And so it was repeated again in September of 1955. And this is the sort of watershed script that turned Serling's star into the ascending thing that we all know it became. And following up on Mark's request, I'm sure the rest of you have comments that you can make about the role that Patterns played in his career.
Well, one of the things that immediately happened after Patterns was that Serling released a lot of scripts that he said he had kept in the trunk and should have stayed in the trunk. And it was done until Requiem for Heavyweight. He actually said everything he wrote that was produced was compared to Patterns, and it just didn't hold up. Requiem was his baby. Patterns did become a movie, did not do well, but I make the analogy between after Patterns, which established him as a household name, until Requiem, the Twilight Zone established him as a household name, and unfortunately, nothing has really held up to that since then, even though he did so much after.
Yeah, a question I had for some of the people here. Was it sensed that Serling had Patterns, some of the executive machinations in Patterns against what he had experienced at WLW? Because certainly some people from that time said, well, for example, Ramsey was, at least partly based on John Murphy, for example.
And Dunville and Shells.
Yes.
That's right, that's right.
He did write the outline. In Madison, Wisconsin, there's 3 Serling archives, one at UCLA, one in Madison, Wisconsin, and one at Ithaca College. The Madison one is what Serling gave to the university, and it's the only one that's fully open to anyone that wants to go see it. In it, in one of the folders, is called Notes and Ideas that he wrote in Ohio. And inside of that is a 2-page story treatment which later became Patterns. That was written in Ohio.
And Mike was also talking about something that might be a good video clip, at least for us to end on, because it does come from the Cincinnati period and was later produced as part of the Desolate Playhouse as the pilot for the Twilight Zone. So I'm going to turn it over to you for just a moment, Mike, if you can talk a little bit about the time element and when it was done during Serling's tenure in Cincinnati.
Just pull my notes a bit here. The time element appeared as a episode of The Storm. Let's see, when was that? During the second season, first part of 1952, and if I can get it up here, the time element was later reworked by Serling into the sort of model that he envisioned for the series The Twilight Zone, and he presented it to CBS as a pilot, and CBS decided that they were going to pass on it. So what Serling did...
Our guesses, even on the secretarial level, could cause others a great deal of...
What Serling did was he took the script that he had prepared for, let's see here, for this pilot that he was trying to sell to CBS, and it ran as an episode of Desilu Playhouse. Oops, sorry, I'm going back to the menu. These buttons are too small.
That was in 1956. After Patterns came out, Serling signed a contract with CBS guaranteeing so many original stories he would write for them, including supposedly some pilots for TV shows. One of them included was the time element, which CBS turned down. They said, we're not interested in it. We have no idea. To get to the CBS archives is arduous to say at the least. You have to know what you're looking for. I had an easier time with the Department of Defense than CBS. We don't know what other shows they turned down, but they did turn down this pilot that we submitted in 1956. NBC, I want to say. The Desilu Theater approached him and said, we want to do some of your works. And he goes, well, I got the script from that CBS has turned down. Didn't they spend $10,000 to buy the rights?
I believe so.
And after it aired, correct me if I'm wrong, Desilu received more letters after this broadcast praising it than they had in all of their other broadcasts combined. And then CBS said, maybe there's something there. And so, yeah, Desi Arnaz really got a lot of feedback about this program, and when that became evident to the executives of CBS, they wanted to take a second look at the Twilight Zone concept that Serling had pitched. And what they did at that point in time was, rather than go back and use the time element again because, well, that's already aired, they ordered up a new pilot, and that is the pilot that everybody knows as the true Twilight Zone pilot. But here we have the original pilot as Serling had envisioned.
Walked into the office 9 minutes ago. It is 11 o'clock, Saturday morning, October 4th, 1958. It is perhaps chronologically trite to be so specific about an hour and the date, but involved in this story is a time element. Well, Mr. Chairman,
The whole premise of this is this guy has a premonition about Pearl Harbor being attacked, and he can't get anybody to believe him.
No previous arrests either. The only time I ever saw a psychiatrist before was in a cartoon.
Well, at best you find it helpful. And at worst, harmless. Cigarette?
No thanks.
No. Your occupation?
Various. Part-time unsuccessful bookie, card dealer. Oh, I tended bar once just down the street from here, a couple of doors. Andy's place. Well, how do I stack up, Doctor? Am I subnormal, abnormal, or just an average American lad?
Family?
Father and mother, both married, Scranton, Pennsylvania. He was a butcher.
Butcher?
Yeah, he was highly successful. His thumbs weighed 12 pounds.
That's a good joke.
You think so? Maybe you should see a psychiatrist. I think I will take one of those cigarettes.
Try help yourself.
Well, you want me to pull up a couch now?
Not necessarily if you're comfortable here. Let's stop right here. You can start by telling me where you came. All right. Nothing shakes you up, does it? How do you mean? I mean, everything is calm and cool, and you're the boss. When I walked in here, I could see you making inventory. Check the cut of the clothes. Check the language. And up there inside your head, that's where you mark down all the results. And then later on, you put the whole thing in pigeonholes. This fits here, this fits there. You've got me pegged, haven't you? No. You figure this is some sort of minor league horse player. Maybe a little hungover, maybe a little bugged. But either way, maybe about 40 degrees tilt. My cigarette went out. All right, pigeonhole this one. Look, if said minor league horse player tells you a half-witted story, can you tell me in one simple statement whether or not I'm off my rocker? Without dragging in Sigmund Freud and a lot of medical school English, can you tell me what's wrong with me? I can try. I keep having a dream. Aren't you going to mark it down? You keep talking. I'll just make some notes on things that I think are pertinent. I don't know whether or not any of this will sound pertinent. I do know it'll probably sound nuts. I know it sounds nuts to me. Anyway, there it is. Okay, tell me about it. Well, I keep having this dream. I've had it, I don't know, 5 or 6 times now. What sort of dream? A real one. Did you ever have any wacky dreams that seemed...
So the dream is about Pearl Harbor being attacked. And, the concept there, and you can watch the rest of it in your own time. But you can certainly see a lot of the earmarks of the Twilight Zone in terms of the kind of focus on interior kinds of things. The guy's got some kind of an interior conflict. There's a twist at the end because it turns out to be a true premonition, this kind of stuff. So certainly set the pattern for what we later saw in the Twilight Zone, and has all the earmarks of the beginning of the lineage there of the kinds of scripts that he cranked out with just unrelenting passion for that show.
And so in a very real sense, perhaps the beginnings of the Twilight Zone were indeed here in Cincinnati during Rod Serling's time at WLW and WKRC. I would just like to turn to the 3 gentlemen to my left for some final thoughts, perhaps starting with John, about your time working with Rod Serling and just summing up what that association meant to your career, meant to your life, even though it was pretty early on in your professional career.
Most of my association was devoted to watching him go out the door.
Is Carol still
I remember this about Rod, though, that hasn't come up. He did teach writing at the radio department at the College of Music. And all of the students that I knew that took writing from Rod were very impressed with him. I mean, they were real Rod Serling fans. They felt they learned a great deal.
Okay, Jack, any final thoughts?
I think we're maybe missing something here. We're talking about all the different shows and how successful he was. But as the guy and his words, if you listen to his words, how sharp they are, and crackling, crisp dialogue, most impressed me, which you're seldom find in writing today.
And finally, Saul Marmer, do you have any final thoughts about Rod Serling as a person and as your good friend for so many years?
I'd like to come to his defense a little bit. I've been interviewed, my wife and I were interviewed a number of times, and in so many instances, the writer or the producer or the TV or whatever, with the exception of Mike Sanders, he came and visited us, and made a beautiful interview. But everybody else, there was a gentleman with a similar name who was writing a book, and it was going to be The Last Angry Man, and every question that came out of his mouth was trying to get my wife and I to agree that he was just angry all the time, and that wasn't the Rod Serling that I knew. We had the E! Television Network came and spent hours taking our furniture out of our living room and taking our I think it was an hour and a half of my time, and my wife was an invalid at the time, and we had to lift her out of bed, and it took about a half an hour of her time. And the thrust of it was to prove what a womanizer he had become. And that wasn't the Rod Serling that I knew. And if you ever see the E! Television thing, and it's shown every once in a while, my interview took an hour and a half, and I got about 15 seconds. My wife's with a half an hour, she got 30 seconds. I don't know what justice there is.
Hence your bitterness.
Anyway, when Rod was here, he was a very, very, very nice person. You would have loved him for a neighbor.
Okay, before we wrap up, I think we can take some questions for any one of our panelists. Let us start with the gentleman in the back in the black shirt, please.
Two questions. The E, what was that his middle name, or what did the mean E stand for? Because that's what he started.
Edward.
Edward. And then I wish we had more programs like this, because it seems like a lot of the local talents, doctors, lawyers, whatever, all that information is being sold out to the Friends of the Library, or however it's going away. We need to have more things like this to bring it back in and keep it here in the community, so we know our heritage. So I thank you for bringing this here.
Well, thanks for coming.
Tell the story about when you went to meet Rod out at on Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Oh, yes. Okay. Thanks. I have two or three things to share with you which aren't as profound as some of the things you've heard, but I was a student along with some of the others in the old College of Music days in the Radio TV Arts Department, and I took creative writing. I must say I wasn't one of Rod's better prospects, but, you know. But again, he was very, very forthright. Before I touch on that, Saul, I'll just say it was a strange college in that we called the teachers by their first names and they called us by our first names. We smoked in class, and it was incredibly informal. And all of the teachers, most of the teachers, you talk about Manel Stollard-Weaver, a wonderful speech teacher. She corrected a lot of our problems. They were all people who were working in the business, so we got a wonderful education because they worked every day in broadcasting.
I still have all my notes if you'd like to see
Yeah, that's something, the things we saved, but yeah. Rod would sit there, and if he were out of cigarettes, he'd say, "Has anybody got a king-size filter?" You know, and so one of the students would come up and provide it. After I graduated in 1954, I went to New York to Fordham University to go on to get a master's degree. And of course, it was just at that time that Rod had taken up residence in Connecticut. And Jim Riley is sitting there. Jim was in the class too. And you remember Jane Hazlitt? She'd gone to New York to seek her fortune as a singer, and was working there at NBC as a page girl. So she and I and her roommate, those two gals and I, were invited by Rod to go to Connecticut, to his home, which he had bought not too long prior to that. And it was an autumn afternoon in 1954. And we took a train up, I guess a commuter train, and he met us at the station. And there he was in a brand new 1955 Lincoln convertible, a blue, pale powder blue car. And as everyone said, Rod didn't come up too high to the steering wheel. But there he was, and I said, I was 20 at the time, I said, man, this is really some car, Rod. And he said, yeah, he says, I bought the biggest damn car I could find. And so we went on to his home and had a delightful evening. And you probably had heard this, but he did show us his office where he worked. And in there was a dictaphone. You remember, I know some of you remember dictaphones. They had like a cylinder on them, and you push the button and talk into a little metal, like a funnel, and it would record on this drum. It was almost, you think like an Edison recording, but that was the dictaphone system. It was on a belt. And that he recorded his dialogue, he spoke it, he didn't type it. Much of the time it was all here, and he just spoke it. And it's probably an understandable situation as the thoughts were coming to him. He could speak them much faster than he could type them, and someone transcribed them. The other story I wanted to share was, it's well known, I think, that Rod was singular in that his play, the teleplay Patterns, was the first television drama which was ever made into a Hollywood motion picture. There were others that followed, but that was the first one. And it premiered in New York on Times Square at a theater called the Mayfair Theater. And I have a slide that I shot of the marquee in part of Times Square. And it premiered in March of 1956. And the story, and I believe it to be true, is that Rod stood in the outer lobby of the theater, and as folks had come out of the theater having seen this motion picture, was kind of overhearing what they were saying and kind of getting the reviews. And of course, at that point, to see him, no one would have recognized him yet. So he was absorbing the thoughts of and the remarks of the people who were coming out of the Mayfair Theater. You had to know, the Rod that Saul and I and the others knew, that he was so thrilled to be able to be there and soak that up. So that's pretty much just a little added background. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Okay, your turn.
Mark, I hadn't met Rod, but a gentleman two people that I recall that interfaced, and you didn't mention. Do any of you remember a Charlie Eckerly?
Yes. Very fine actor.
Okay, he worked with me. His regular daytime job was personnel director of Bushman Company, where I worked, and so I worked with him a number of years until he retired. He passed away a number of years ago, and he talked. I remember talking to him about the storm and how he appeared. Of course, he appeared in other plays.
Many radio shows.
Radio dramas, and he talked a lot about it because I was studying radio and television at Xavier, and then I went on to the University of Detroit. And by the time I got up there and I studied drama, we were already talking about Rod Serling. The other person you didn't mention, and I kind of recall, you talked about Bob Huber and some of those people, was Charlton Wallace, who was the radio TV. A lot of that, he documented so much of that. That's how I knew a lot of it going into it, and how it fascinated me when he was with the Time Star. I was in those studios, by the way. You mentioned about bumping your head. I wasn't tall enough for that to happen, but I was on a program called Hello Teacher. You probably, Bill, remembers that. Sid Cornell. And I was on a nativity school, and it was so hot. That was the hottest I'd ever been in my life with those lights coming, and they couldn't have been more than that far away. And that was that was the 7th floor, I think, where they did the storm. And the 8th floor, we did some teenage programs on Saturday afternoon up on the 8th floor. But those studios, compared up the University of Detroit where I went, we had a super studio that was made out of a funeral home. And that's better than what KRC had until they moved to Highland there. But I worked and ended up, I did corporate video, so it paid off later on. But did want to find out about Eckerly because I figured you probably knew him. One gal that should get some credit now that we're talking about the storm and everything else was the gal who was the prop gal for Bob. Her name was Pat Thomas, and she would do anything to get a prop. And I vividly remember her coming in the studio with a pot-bellied stove, wrestling this sucker in there on some show.
There's an episode of The Storm that has Jay Overholt in the front seat of an automobile. He's driving it, and she went to a junkyard and had them cut apart a car and brought it in pieces up the elevator.
They're talking about me, sir.
There she is, right there.
Oh, really? Hey, Pat.
Yeah, I'm the guilty party. If any of you saw this article, which some of you got you down here, I'm the character on the far side. This was 54 years ago. I had a lot more hair and it was dark brown then. And I brought along the storm from that I found. My mother, of all things, saved this. And when I found that it was wrapped in folded in 4 ways in a newspaper, I looked at the back of what did my mother want me to say? Fashions, an article? And then I turned it around and here's the storm article about and God, no gods to serve. By way of explanation, when he would come up with the damnedest things for me to do a session. I have to say that in all honesty. For instance, one time he wanted me to do an electric chair. The first thing I thought of being from Ohio, I called Ohio State Penitentiary, Columbus. I don't know who the warden was then, so I wrote him a very nice letter. Did he have any pictures of an electric chair from either Columbus or other states? And in the last part of the sentence, I asked him, if you don't have anything sketchy for that week, can we borrow yours? And he wrote me a very nice letter back, sending me all sorts of, something about almost 10 pictures of different places, San Francisco, all of them. And at the end, there was this little comment, we would loan you ours, except that it's been in cement. The other one he had me do, that you mentioned, was cutting a car in half. Remember Carthage, what is it, the place over there? I can't even remember now where it is. I wouldn't know how they even get there anymore. But they used to, I went when I asked it, I used to get stuff from them. And I asked him, could you cut a car in half? And they just looked and stared at me like I was nuts. I probably felt like a nut. And I said, well, remember guys, from the heavy, I was the one with Water and Bread on the waterfront, the scene. I could have been a contender, a little Brando. All right, that's the sort of thing I wanted to do. That's the sort of thing I want, guys. Can you cut one of your cars in half? Well, yeah, if you want, you have any particular brand? I said, I don't care what kind of car it is, just cut the car in half. All I need is the back part for 2 people to sit in. Okay. So I wandered around out there in the lot. You have all the different cars and parked. I said, oh, great, that one looks good. I don't remember what it was, Oldsmobile or whatever. So they cut it out. They said, well, wait a minute, fellas, let me get inside and see how much room the space will need. Because I had to figure, the cameras back then, I don't know whether people realize them now, we had, this is enormous. This would be like WLW. Yeah. Back then, yeah. Memory lane? Yeah. But when I had to allow not only time for what I did the sets, for instance, this one with the storm, No Gods to Serve, we couldn't he had to have a dirt floor. This is Korea. The story was based in Korea. And there was supposed to be a dirt floor. Can you imagine taking and putting dirt floor down on this floor? I had to get a tarpaulin to cover the floor, and then bring in through the Napo Gardens to bring in the dirt, bags full of it, to lower it down to create the illusion of the dirt floor in a Korean farm or home. We get it all built, we get the stairs, the whole thing built, and one of the guys came back from Korea, a friend of Rod's, I guess, and he said, I hate to tell you guys, but they don't have basements in Korea. Thanks a lot. But that's the sort of thing you pull on me. But listen, I'm trying to think of another bit. Every time I turn around, I do know one that was what series and where, and it was something to do with it was a submarine. And when he would give me the scripts, that was another thing. I assembled the scripts also, so the readings for like Bob here would do the cast readings. en masse each week, and they did. He came up with a summary. I said, Rod, you didn't. He said, what? Up Periscope, for third page, third line, up Periscope. I said, where? There wasn't even this big of a thing. You go, what was the top of the sets was about 7 or 8 feet. And there was about 2 feet after that, so that's 9 feet tall. Go up Periscope where? And I was very lucky in that. There was, for some reason why, I don't know, there was a U.S. cruiser on the Ohio River. What they were doing in the Ohio River then in the 50s, I don't know. But they had a mock-up, and they were doing some training from, I guess, for some local recruiting purpose. And they got the guys. I went down, talked to the commander or whoever the guy was. I asked him, did he have a mock-up of a telescope that I could use for a telescope? I showed him the script. I had to explain what I was doing, otherwise he thought I was nuts. I showed him, and they actually did various equipment to train recruits. If you're going to be a seaman in such and such a submarine, da-da-da-da-da, and you're going to be whatever the title of the guy they're going to be, they would have to learn how these different instruments, what the bell mean, how you read them, where they are in relationship to everything else for the submarine. So it actually worked out. I was actually able to get the actual submarine post that actually worked. I didn't go anywhere. I mean, a periscope and Bob would pan to something else. I made the sound effect for doing it. But those two, that's partly, and we had the water, the dirt on the floor. We got all that dust coming up in the equipment and the cameras. In addition to people trying to talk, you ever try to walk around in dirt anywhere for any length of time, that gets in your throat. And the people were constantly, thank God we had a lot of Coke machines where people were wafting those down, keeping their throats wet or wet to do the whole bit. But Rod used to come up with some doozies for me to do.
It's a wonder you have any sanity left.
It's a wonder you have any sanity left.
Yeah, out of necessity, yes.
I've got to tell you a little bit about that time. The first major shopping center was being built here in Cincinnati in the Western Hills area. And we had a store in there. And one of the things that we were trying, we had a wonderful children's business, but we also wanted to get some of the business that would be generated by their parents and their grandparents who would bring in the kids. So we built a little playroom where after the kids had gotten their shoes, they would go in and play, and then we had a chance to hit Mama and Papa. And we were trying to think of something to put in there that would be unique and different, other than just some few toys, and a table or the draw on or whatever. And he came up with the idea of an automobile, and we got a half a car too. And we put it into that little room, and every time Rod came up to the store, he was in that room driving it out.
I remember.
Okay, continuing on that side of the room, gentleman with the glasses, please.
In 1962, Serling came back to Antioch and taught for a quarter. And I was living there at the time. And his movie, Requiem for Heavyweight, came out at that same time. So I went down to see it on opening night. And after the film was over, the lights came on. And he had been sitting in the front row. And he wheeled, got up, and said, "What do you think?" It was very strange because I'd never been to a movie before that this guy who wrote the screenplay was actually there. Well, it was mainly students, but they were highly critical. They all thought they were professional movie critics, of course. So he told one funny little story about he watched the filming one time between Gleason and Quinn. And Gleason was this old burlesque vaudeville guy who just winged it. And Quinn was very careful about everything, and they started the scene, and Quinn stopped the scene and said, "I think if I come in this way, it's going to work better." So they tried it that way, and the next time they tried it, he said, "No, I think if the light's over here." Well, this went on about 8 or 9 times. Finally, Gleason said, "One more I think, and I'm out here." Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start on this side of the room. Maybe you want to
Yeah, I just want to say I worked with Rod Serling at WKRC-TV. My name was Zelma Sharf, and I worked there for 2 years. I just want to say he was a wonderful teacher. He was wonderful to work with. He was tough, but he taught you many things, and when you had to do little things, whatever the little things were, right, Pat? I mean, you did what you could for him, and he was very, very understanding of the people he worked with, and very kind to the people that he worked with, because when we were at the station, we did everything. If we had to move a camera, if we had to do the script, whatever we had to do, we did. I mean, that's the way it was when we were there. So I think it's wonderful for you to hear this program so that we can all reminisce and come back to when we were young at once time.
Okay.
I just had a quick question. What year did he leave Cincinnati, and where was he living when he left?
Oh, he left in 53. I think he left in 53.
He lived on Long Lane, out by Wyoming.
Yeah, when he moved out of the apartment on Sydney Road, he bought a home out on Long Lane, which is not actually Wyoming, it's a county or township or whatever. And he had some very dear friends there by the name of Deerwester, and I tried time and time again to get in touch with them for one reason or another. I've lost contact with them, but they became the neighbors, I guess, that the garbage went down in one disposal and up in theirs, maybe.
Two questions. First on patterns. Was that Elizabeth Montgomery, that young actress? It was, okay. And secondly, does it seem strange to any of you who knew him, small in stature, but you said temper, married to a woman who dominated him? Did that seem, I don't know.
Incongruous?
Yeah.
She was the right gal for him, though, because she took over the running of the home, the running of the family, almost the running of his life, and she was his sharpest critic, but in a sense, she didn't tell him how to do it or what to do or how to change it, but this just doesn't work. And he would then go back and take her advice and rewrite it differently and see if that came out. And again, he would test it only after he had it all finished, never in the middle.
Yes. I would like to make kind of at least two comments. One, about how Rod Serling has become part of pop culture in the line of his work, like his introductions to the Twilight Zone. For instance, just recently, the creators of the series The Family Guy did a parody of him. For instance, one of the characters, Peter Griffin, is arguing with his neighbors, and they are doing a parody of The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. And then Rod actually comes in one of his classic one-liners, like he's like standing in another room or something like that. And then the other characters who are arguing and are about ready to slaughter each other, they then spot Rod and then go after him with pitchforks. Yeah. And the other comment I would like to ask you, I'm a recent graduate of the Ohio Center for Broadcasting, and I recently talked to Gary Burbank. He's a radio personality here in Cincinnati. He says that there's a kind of an inside joke about what the letters WLW stands for, and I'm wondering if Rod actually knew this. Does the station WLW stand for World's Lowest Wages?
Okay, anyone else?
I'd just like to get some more information on the book that was mentioned in the story, in the paper.
In the paper.
Book mentioned.
Who's writing the book?
She's writing.
I'm writing the book. It's called Requiem for a Heavyweight, Stories of Rod Serling. and it starts from his military career. Each chapter, I'm not going to list each chapter, but each chapter, as well as the name of the book, is named after one of his teleplays, and it opens with certain honorable men, story of his war career, where I actually interviewed 3 people that served with him in the 511th, and did jumps with him. And it ends with his impact on the medium. So it covers his entire career. I have visited all 3 archives.
When
Would
would
you
that
like
be
to know about it?
expected? When would that be expected available?
I'm supposed to be done with it June 1st.
When's it gonna be done?
It's actually on the publisher's schedule,
Okay.
but the date is moving.
That's when fear sets in.
No, that's when the check goes bad. Who's the publisher?
Publisher?
I'm not supposed to send it.
Okay.
Amy, in your research, did not Rod have some exposure to boxing in his earlier years?
Yes.
Absolutely.
He was a boxer.
in the Army.
In service.
Yeah, okay.
In service, he was
I'd
a
say
boxer.
he's very good.
He supposedly fought 19 fights. He won the first 18. That's the rumor, and that he busted his nose.
He was a boxer, true, not a fighter. There's a difference between the two. He could dance around and keep from getting hit as hard as they were trying to hit him, and that made him. That's how he got through those 18.
I was just wondering, did any of his plays then originate from 8H at NBC New York? You know? Like Craft Theater? Were any of them on Craft Theater?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that's what I think that's where.
That was the big studio.
Yeah, that's for live from New York Saturday night. Yeah.
Okay, and one final one.
I picked up this book earlier today, 50 Years of Television, and The Twilight Zone, according to TV Guide, is number 26, which is pretty interesting. All the best TV shows.
Oh.
And I'm just a Coverdale resident myself, was telling a colleague of mine at work in January who's got hundreds of old books. I said, do you have any of Rod Serling's books? And here I am today, seeing the ad in the TV, which or the press, which I read every week. Every question I've had has been answered. You guys have done a great job. As a just common citizen of the West Side, I've really enjoyed myself.
I just want to point out one thing really quickly when you said this, the number is, when Newton Minow gave his vast wasteland speech, what's often overlooked, because I'm a nerd now about Rod Serling, is that he said, when television is good, nothing's better. And he highlighted 2 programs, and one of them was the Twilight Zone.
I have one comment to make that when Rod was here in Cincinnati, I was twice the writer he was. I used 2 fingers to type. Rod used 1, his thumb was for capitals. I was twice the writer.
Okay, I think that's it. Once again, I want to thank everyone on the panel. And of course, big thanks to the Cincinnati Public Library for making this possible, and of course, Brian, who, by the way, I don't think I mentioned this earlier. Brian started this project, and then you were transferred to what division?
I started out literature on the films.
Okay, so he moved over into films, and basically he has shepherded this through all the way, and it's been a labor of love for him, so Brian, thank you very much.
His transfer shows that no good deed goes unpunished.
And once again, thanks to everybody for showing up.
Thank you, Laura.